Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. I stared at the computer screen, my eyes burning from hours of scrolling through spreadsheets. The numbers blurred together, a jumble of digits that refused to add up. I rubbed my temples, trying to ward off the headache I felt coming on. 15 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to: late nights balancing budgets while my wife slept peacefully upstairs. "Dad?" Sophie's voice startled me. I looked up to see my teenage daughter standing in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. "It's past midnight. Are you coming to bed soon?" I forced a smile. "Just finishing up some work, sweetheart. You should be asleep." She hesitated, then walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're working too hard. Maybe you should take a break?" I patted her hand. "I'll be up soon. Don't worry about me." After Sophie left, I turned back to the screen with a sigh. That's when I saw a series of transactions I didn't recognize. Thousands of dollars, withdrawn over the past few months. My stomach clenched as I dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of spending that made no sense. I picked up my phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a number I hadn't called in years. "Armando? It's Stanley. I need your help." The next morning, I went through the motions of getting ready for work, my mind racing with possibilities. Megan breezed into the kitchen, looking far too put together for 7 a.m. "Morning, honey," she said, kissing my cheek. "You were up late last night. Everything okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She chatted about her plans for the day as I sipped my coffee, barely hearing a word. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Megan," I interrupted, "we need to talk about our finances." She froze, her smile faltering for just a second before she recovered. "What about them?" "There's money missing from our account. A lot of money. Do you know anything about that?" Megan's eyes darted away, and I knew. In that moment, I knew everything. "It's not what you think," she began, but I cut her off. "Then what is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been stealing from our family." Her face hardened. "I wouldn't call it stealing. It's my money too." "To spend on what?" I demanded. "Or should I say, on who?" Megan's silence was all the confirmation I needed. I slammed my mug down on the counter, coffee sloshing over the sides. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice low and controlled. She lifted her chin defiantly. "His name is Wesley. He's a bartender at the Rusty Nail." "A bartender," I repeated. "And how old is this bartender?" Megan's eyes flashed. 28. "And before you say anything, Stanley, he makes me feel alive. When was the last time you did that?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a step back, struggling to process what I was hearing. "I've been working my ass off to keep this family afloat," I said. "Double shifts at the factory, scraping together every penny I can. And this is how you repay me?" Megan laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, please. You think I want to be married to some washed-up accountant who can barely make ends meet? I'm tired of struggling, Stanley. I deserve better." "You deserve better," I repeated, my voice flat. "And you think this Wesley can give you that?" She shrugged. "At least he's not boring." I stared at her, this woman I thought I knew. 15 years of marriage, reduced to this. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The kind, understanding Stanley was gone. In his place stood a man with ice in his veins and vengeance in his heart. "Get out," I said quietly. Megan blinked. "What?" I said. "Get out. Go to the guest room. You're cut off financially and emotionally. I want you out of my sight." "You can't do that," she sputtered. "This is my house too." I stepped closer with a low voice. "Watch me." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Megan's eyes. Good. She should be afraid, because the man she married was dead, and what remained would stop at nothing to make her pay. As Megan stormed out of the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and dialed Armando again. "I need everything you can dig up on Wesley quick," I said when he answered. "And I mean everything." Armando didn't disappoint. Within days, he had compiled a dossier on Wesley Quick that would make the FBI jealous. Photos, receipts, text messages, a treasure trove of evidence detailing every sordid detail of Megan's affair. I sat in Armando's cluttered office, flipping through the file with cold detachment. Each new revelation should have hurt, but I felt nothing. Just a growing resolve to make them both pay. You sure you want to go through with this? Armando asked, watching me carefully. Once you pull the trigger on something like this, there's no going back. I looked up at him, my old friend's face etched with concern. I'm sure, I said. They made their choice. Now it's time to face the consequences. Armando nodded slowly. All right, what's the next move? I stood up, tucking the file under my arm. Public exposure. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people they are. That's going to burn a lot of bridges, Armando warned. You ready for that? I met his gaze steadily. I'm ready for anything. Over the next week, I orchestrated Megan's downfall with surgical precision. Evidence was leaked to friends, family, and her workplace. I watched from a distance as her carefully constructed world crumbled around her. At home, Megan alternated between rage and desperate attempts at reconciliation. I rebuffed every advance, my heart sealed off behind walls of ice. Please, Stanley, she begged one night, tears streaming down her face. We can work this out. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't throw away 15 years of marriage. I looked at her dispassionately. You threw it away the moment you decided to fuck a bartender half your age. Megan flinched at my words. That's not fair. We've both made mistakes. No, I cut her off. You made a choice. Now you get to live with it. As I turned to walk away, Megan grabbed my arm. What happened to you? She whispered. You used to be so kind, so forgiving. Now you're cold. I jerked my arm free. The old Stanley is dead. You killed him. With Megan's social life in tatters, I turned my attention to the legal battlefield. I hired the best divorce lawyer in the state and filed for full custody of Sophie and Jake. On what grounds? Megan demanded when she was served with the papers. Infidelity, financial mismanagement, and neglect, I replied calmly. Take your pick. She laughed bitterly. You'll never get full custody. The courts always favor the mother. I smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. We'll see about that. As the divorce proceedings ramped up, I threw myself into self-improvement with single-minded focus. I joined a gym, working out until my muscles screamed. I updated my wardrobe, traded in my old sedan for a sleek sports car. The new Stanley was emerging, harder and sharper than before. It was after one of these workouts that I had my first run-in with Wesley. I was leaving the gym when a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. You Stanley, a voice growled. I found myself face to face with a young man, his good looks marred by a sneer. That's me, I replied coolly. And you must be Wesley. His eyes narrowed. Listen up, old man. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to back off. Megan's with me now. I laughed, genuinely amused. Is that so? Tell me, Wesley, how's it feel to be sleeping with a woman old enough to be your mother? His face flushed with anger. Watch your mouth, or I'll... You'll what? I interrupted, stepping closer. Go ahead. Take a swing. Give me one more reason to bury you. Wesley hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my lack of fear. I pressed my advantage. Let me make something very clear, I said, my voice low and menacing. You picked the wrong man to fuck with. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never laid eyes on Megan. I turned and walked away, leaving Wesley sputtering impotently behind me. As I got into my car, I caught sight of a woman watching the exchange from nearby. She met my eyes for a moment before quickly looking away. Little did I know, that woman would soon become a key player in my quest for revenge. The courthouse loomed before me, a monument to justice that would soon become the battlefield for my war against Megan. I straightened my tie, taking a deep breath to center myself. This was at the first major salvo in our legal battle. As I climbed the steps, I caught sight of Megan and her lawyer huddled near the entrance. She looked haggard, the strain of the past few weeks etched on her face. Good. Let her suffer. Mr. Albert, my lawyer, Sarah Chun, greeted me with a firm handshake. Are you ready for this? I nodded. More than ready. Let's do this. We entered the courtroom, the tension palpable as Megan and I took our places on opposite sides. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, called the court to order. "We're here today to discuss interim arrangements for child custody and financial support," she began. "I understand there are some serious allegations being made. Mr. Albert, your attorney may present your case." Sarah stood, her voice clear and confident as she laid out our argument. She detailed Megan's affair, the financial mismanagement, and her neglect of our children. I watched Megan's face as each accusation landed, her composure cracking with each new revelation. When it was Megan's turn to speak, she tried to paint herself as the victim. "Your Honor, I made a mistake, but I'm still a good mother. Stanley is trying to punish me by taking away my children. It's cruel and unfair." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Albert, infidelity is one thing, but these financial records show a pattern of behavior that goes beyond a simple indiscretion. Can you explain why you withdrew over $50,000 from your joint accounts without your husband's knowledge?" Megan stammered, clearly unprepared for the question. I needed the money for personal reasons." "Personal reasons," the judge repeated skeptically. "Mr. Albert, do you have any insight into these personal reasons?" I stood, my voice steady. "Your Honor, the money was spent on lavish gifts for her lover, hotel rooms for their encounters, and other expenses related to her affair. While our children went without, my wife was spending our hard-earned money on a man half her age." Megan's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That's not true. Stanley's twisting everything to make me look bad." The judge held up a hand. "Mrs. Albert, please control yourself. Based on the evidence presented today, I'm inclined to grant temporary primary custody to Mr. Albert, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Albert. As for finances, Mrs. Albert will be required to provide a full accounting of all expenditures related to her extramarital affair." I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction as Megan's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. This was only the beginning, but it was a decisive victory. As we left the courthouse, I was approached by a woman I recognized from the gym, the one who had witnessed my confrontation with Wesley. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Are you Stanley Albert?" I nodded, curious. "I am. And you are?" "Gabriela Martinez," she replied, offering her hand. I have some information about Wesley Quick that I think you might want to hear." I exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Why don't we grab a coffee?" I suggested to Gabriela. Over lattes at a nearby cafe, Gabriela's story spilled out. She was a single mother who worked as a waitress at the Rusty Nail, where Wesley tended bar. What she revealed about his character and activities made my blood boil. "He's not just a bartender," Gabriela explained, her voice low. "Wesley's involved in some pretty shady stuff. Drugs, mostly, but I've overheard things that make me think it goes deeper than that." I leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of things?" Gabriela glanced around nervously before continuing. "There's talk of connections to organized crime, money laundering through the bar. I can't prove any of it, but you've seen enough to know something's not right," I finished for her. She nodded. "Exactly. When I saw you confronting him at the gym, I knew I had to say something. Wesley's dangerous, Mr. Albert. If he's involved with your wife, you need to be careful." I sat back, processing this new information. It was more than I could have hoped for, a potential way to not just humiliate Wesley, but to destroy him completely. "Thank you for telling me this, Gabriela," I said sincerely. "It can't have been easy to come forward." She shrugged, a sad smile on her face. "I'm tired of watching bad people get away with hurting others. If I can help stop that, even a little, it's worth the risk." As we parted ways, I felt a surge of renewed energy. The pieces were falling into place, a perfect storm of retribution brewing on the horizon. Megan and Wesley had no idea what was coming for them. I pulled out my phone, dialing Armando's number. "I need you to look into some potential criminal connections," I said when he answered. "It's time to take this to the next level." Armando's low whistle came through the line. "You're playing with fire, Stanley. You sure about this?" I thought of Megan's betrayal, of Wesley's smug face, of the pain they had caused my family. My resolve hardened. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "It's time to burn it all down." I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee and scrolling through emails on my phone when I heard tentative footsteps behind me. Without looking up, I knew it was Megan. Her presence filled the air with tension, a stark contrast to the peaceful routine I'd established since kicking her out of our bedroom. "Stanley," she said softly, "can we talk?" I took another sip of coffee before responding. "About what?" Megan moved into my line of sight, her face a mask of contrition. "About us. About everything that's happened." I set down my mug and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. She'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Good. Let her suffer. There is no us anymore, Megan," I said flatly. "You made sure of that." She flinched at my words but pressed on. "I know I hurt you. I made a terrible mistake. But we've been married for 15 years. Doesn't that count for something?" I laughed, a harsh sound that made her take a step back. 15 years of lies, you mean? 15 years of you pretending to love me while you fucked some bartender behind my back? "It wasn't like that," Megan protested. "I do love you, Stanley. Wesley was just a mistake. A moment of weakness." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "A moment? You stole thousands of dollars from our family to finance your moment, Megan. You neglected our children. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, Stanley, give me another chance. We can fix this." For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes when she called me a boring old bastard. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "It's over, Megan. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." She reached for me, her fingers grasping at my shirt. "Don't do this. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. Start over." I grabbed her wrists, firmly pushing her away. "No, we can't. I don't want to start over with you. I don't want anything to do with you." Megan's face crumpled. "What about the kids? They need both of us. They need a mother who puts them first," I snapped. "Not someone who throws away their security for a cheap thrill." She opened her mouth to argue further, but I cut her off. "This conversation is over. I have to get to work." As I walked past her, Megan called out one last time. "I still love you, Stanley." I paused at the door, not bothering to look back. "That's your problem, not mine." I left the house, Megan's sobs fading behind me. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park. 1 p.m. Come alone. W. Wesley." My lips curled into a sneer as I typed a response. "I'll be there." The park was busy when I arrived, families enjoying the warm afternoon sun. I spotted Wesley lounging on a bench near the river, his cocky demeanor a stark contrast to the peaceful surroundings. "Well, well," he drawled as I approached. "If it isn't the man of the hour." I sat down next to him, my posture relaxed but alert. "What do you want, Wesley?" He turned to face me, his eyes narrowed. "I want you to back off. Drop the divorce proceedings. Stop digging into my past. Let Megan go." I laughed. "Or what?" Wesley leaned in close, his voice low and menacing. "Or things might get ugly for you, old man. I've got friends in low places. It would be a shame if something unfortunate happened to you." I met his gaze steadily, unimpressed by his bravado. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "It should," he growled. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I stood up, smoothing out my jacket. "No, Wesley, you have no idea who you're messing with. I'm not some pushover you can intimidate. You want to play hardball? Fine. But remember, you started this war. I'm just going to finish it." As I walked away, Wesley called after me. "You're making a big mistake, Stanley." I turned back, a cold smile on my face. The only mistake was Megan thinking she could trade up by sleeping with a two-bit thug like you. I left him sputtering on the bench, my mind already racing with plans. Wesley's threat had confirmed my suspicions about his criminal connections. Now it was time to use that information against him. Later that evening, as I pored over the files Armando had compiled on Wesley, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gabriella standing on my porch, looking nervous. "Mr. Albert," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I overheard something at the bar tonight. Something about you. I ushered her inside. My curiosity piqued. What did you hear? Gabriella took a deep breath. Wesley was talking to some scary-looking guys. They were planning something. I think they're going to try to frame you for a crime. My blood ran cold. What kind of crime? She shook her head. I'm not sure. But they mentioned planting evidence, making it look like you were involved in something illegal. I clenched my fists, anger coursing through me. Thank you for telling me this, Gabriella. You're taking a big risk. She met my eyes, determination shining through her fear. I know, but it's the right thing to do. Wesley and his friends, they're dangerous. Someone needs to stop them. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Someone will. I promise you that. As Gabriella left, I picked up my phone and dialed Armando's number. We need to move fast, I said when he answered. Things are about to get complicated. The knock on my door came at 6 a.m., sharp and authoritative. I was already awake, having spent a sleepless night preparing for this moment. I opened the door to find two stone-faced detectives on my porch. Stanley Albert? The older one asked, flashing his badge. I'm Detective Ramirez. This is my partner, Detective Chun. We have a warrant for your arrest. I nodded calmly. I've been expecting you. May I ask what the charges are? Detective Chin's eyebrows rose slightly at my lack of surprise. Money laundering and drug trafficking. We have evidence linking you to a major operation run out of the Rusty Nail Bar. I held out my wrists. I understand. I'll come quietly, but I want to call my lawyer. As they led me to the police car, I caught sight of Megan watching from the window, her face a mix of shock and confusion. I allowed myself a small smile. The game was on. At the police station, I sat in the interrogation room, waiting patiently as the detectives laid out their case against me. Bank statements showing large deposits. Photos of me meeting with known criminals. A bag of cocaine found in my car. It's quite a collection of evidence, I remarked mildly when they finished. May I ask where you got all this? Detective Ramirez leaned forward. We got an anonymous tip. Let us write to everything we needed. I nodded. I see. And did this anonymous tipper happen to be a bartender named Wesley Quick? The detectives exchanged glances. We can't disclose that information, Chun said carefully. Of course not, I agreed. But hypothetically, if it were Mr. Quick, you might want to look into his own connections to the Rusty Nail. You might find the evidence against me isn't as solid as you think. Before they could respond, the door opened and Sarah Chun, my lawyer, strode in. This interview is over, she announced. My client won't be answering any more questions. As Sarah led me out, I caught a glimpse of Armando in the station lobby, deep in conversation with a man I recognized as the police captain. I allowed myself a small smile. The pieces were falling into place. Over the next few days, a flurry of activity unfolded. Armando worked his contacts in the police department, slowly but surely unraveling the web of lies Wesley had spun. Gabriella came forward with her testimony, providing crucial information about Wesley's illegal activities at the Rusty Nail. Meanwhile, I sat in a jail cell, biding my time. Megan visited once, her face a mask of confusion and anger. What have you done, Stanley? She demanded. Money laundering? Drugs? This isn't you. I looked at her calmly. You're right. It isn't me. But it is your boyfriend. Her eyes widened. Wesley? No, he wouldn't. Wouldn't he? I interrupted. Think about it, Megan. Where did you think all that money was coming from? A bartender's salary? I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. Good. Let her see Wesley for who he really was. Finally, after a week of intensive investigation, the truth came out. The evidence against me was revealed to be fabricated, planted by Wesley in a desperate attempt to discredit me. As the full extent of his crimes came to light, the tables turned dramatically. I stood in the courtroom, watching with satisfaction as Wesley was led away in handcuffs. The judge's voice rang out, clear and final. In light of the new evidence, all charges against Stanley Albert are hereby dismissed. Mr. Quick, you are remanded into custody pending trial for multiple felony charges. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. I held up a hand for silence. I've been the victim of a vicious frame job, I said, my voice steady. But thanks to the diligent work of the police and my own investigator, the truth has come to light. I look forward to putting this behind me and moving on with my life. Gabriella stood nearby, a small smile on her face. As the crowd dispersed, I walked over to her. Thank you, I said quietly. Your testimony made all the difference. She shook her head. I just did what was right. I'm glad it's over. I hesitated for a moment, then asked, would you like to get dinner sometime? To celebrate? Gabriella's smile widened. I'd like that. As we walked away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Wesley was going to prison. My name was cleared. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. But I knew this wasn't over. Megan was still out there, and there were still scores to settle. The war wasn't won yet, but I had struck a decisive blow, and I was just getting started. The fallout from Wesley's arrest was swift and merciless. As news of his crimes spread, the rusty nail found itself at the center of a police investigation. Megan, caught in the crossfire, watched her carefully constructed world crumble around her. I was in my study when the phone rang. It was Megan's boss at the real estate agency. Mr. Albert, he said, his voice tense. I wanted to let you know that we've had to let Megan go. The publicity from this whole situation, it's just too much for our firm to handle. I feigned concern. I understand. It's a difficult situation for everyone. After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Megan had lost her job, her lover, and her reputation. The perfect trifecta of karma. Later that evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Megan standing there, looking shell-shocked. Can I come in? She asked, her voice small. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. We stood in the kitchen, the silence stretching between us. Finally, Megan spoke. I lost my job today. I know, I replied. Your boss called me. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. He called you? Why? I shrugged. Professional courtesy, I suppose. We've known each other a long time. Megan sank into a chair. Her shoulders slumped. I don't know what to do, Stanley. Everything's falling apart. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the pain she'd caused, the lies she'd told. You made your choices, Megan, I said, my voice cold. Now you get to live with the consequences. She flinched at my words. I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes. But isn't there any way we can move past this? For the sake of our family? I laughed, a harsh sound that made her wince. Our family? You threw that away when you decided to sleep with Wesley. You chose him over us, remember? Tears welled up in Megan's eyes. I was wrong. I see that now. Wesley, he wasn't who I thought he was. No, I agreed. He wasn't. But then again, neither were you. Megan stood up suddenly, anger flashing in her eyes. And what about you, Stanley? You're not exactly the same man I married either. The Stanley I knew wouldn't be so cold, so unforgiving. I met her gaze steadily. You're right. I'm not the same man. The old Stanley died the day he found out his wife was cheating on him. This new Stanley? He doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. She took a step back, as if physically struck by my words. So that's it? 15 years of marriage, just over. It was over the moment you decided to betray me, I said. Everything since then has just been tying up loose ends. Megan's face crumpled, the fight going out of her. What am I supposed to do now? I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. You wanted independence? Well, now you've got it. Figure it out yourself. As Megan left, shoulders shaking with sobs, I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Anger, satisfaction, and underneath it all, a small twinge of sadness for what we'd lost. But I pushed it aside. There was no room for sentiment in this new world I was building. The next day, I received a call from a headhunting firm I'd been in contact with. Mr. Albert, the recruiter said, her voice warm. I have excellent news. Blakely and Associates is very impressed with your resume and would like to offer you a position as their new CFO. I felt a surge of triumph. That's wonderful news. When would they like me to start? As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. While Megan's world was collapsing, mine was expanding. The job offer was more than just a career move. It was validation, proof that I was more than the boring old bastard Megan had dismissed me as. That evening, I met Gabriella for dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but notice how different she was from Megan. Where Megan had been all flash and superficial charm, Gabriella was genuine and down to earth. "You seem happy," Gabriella remarked as we perused the menus. "Good news?" I nodded. "I got a job offer today. CFO position at a major firm." Her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Stanley, that's wonderful. Congratulations." As we chatted over dinner, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. Gabriella listened attentively as I talked about my plans for the future, offering insightful comments and asking thoughtful questions. Just as we were finishing our meal, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was from. "You think you've won, old man? This isn't over. Watch your back. W." I showed the text to Gabriella, whose face paled. "Wesley," she whispered. "But how? I thought he was in jail." "He must have made bail," I said. "Don't worry. I'll handle this." Gabriella reached across the table, taking my hand. "Be careful, Stanley. Wesley is dangerous when he's cornered." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I will be, but I'm not afraid of him. He's the one who should be watching his back." As we left the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. Wesley was out there, angry and desperate men were capable of anything. But I was ready for whatever came next. I had come too far to back down now. Wesley's threat only strengthened my resolve to see this through to the end. As Gabriella and I walked to our cars, I noticed a figure lurking in the shadows of the parking lot. My muscles tensed, ready for confrontation. "Get in your car and lock the doors," I told Gabriella quietly. She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. Go." As Gabriella hurried to her vehicle, I turned to face the shadowy figure. "Come out where I can see you," I called. Wesley emerged from the darkness, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Turning everyone against me, ruining my life." I laughed coldly. "You ruined your own life, Wesley. I just exposed the truth." He took a menacing step forward. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. This isn't over." "You're right," I said, my voice hard. "It's not over, but it will be soon. And when the dust settles, you'll wish you'd never crossed me." Wesley lunged at me, his fist swinging wildly. I sidestepped easily, my newfound fitness paying off. As he stumbled past, I grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, slamming him against a nearby car. "Listen carefully," I hissed in his ear. "You come near me or anyone I care about again, and I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell so small you'll forget what sunlight looks like. Understand?" Wesley struggled against my grip, but couldn't break free. "You can't protect everyone," he spat. "Watch your back, old man." I released him with a shove, watching as he staggered away into the night. As the adrenaline faded, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a mixture of anger and excitement. The old Stanley would have been terrified by this confrontation. The new Stanley? He was just getting started. I drove home, my mind racing with plans. Wesley's threat couldn't be ignored, but I refused to let fear dictate my actions. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a light on in the living room. Megan. I found her sitting on the couch, surrounded by photo albums and mementos of our life together. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold. Megan looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I was just remembering. We were happy once, weren't we?" I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. "What do you want, Megan?" She stood up, taking a hesitant step towards me. "I want another chance. To make things right. We could start over, go to counseling." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. That chapter of our lives is over. It's time for both of us to move on." Megan's face crumpled. "How can you be so cold? After everything we've been through together?" I felt a flicker of anger. "Cold? You want to talk about cold?" How about betraying your husband and family for a cheap thrill with a younger man? How's that for cold? She flinched at my words. I made a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake. But doesn't our history count for anything? I shook my head. Our history is exactly why this hurts so much. You threw away 15 years of marriage, Megan. You can't just undo that with an apology. As Megan left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time since this all began, I truly believed that I was making the right choice. The past was behind me. It was time to embrace the future. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, squinting at the unfamiliar number on the screen. Hello? I answered, my voice rough with sleep. Stanley? Gabriella's voice came through, tight with fear. Help me. Wesley. He's here. The line went dead. I was out of bed in an instant, heart pounding. This was it. Wesley had made his move. I dialed Armando's number as I threw on clothes. Gabriella's been taken, I said the moment he picked up. Wesley. Armando swore colorfully. I'll be at your place in 10 minutes. We'll find her, Stanley. As I paced the living room, waiting for Armando, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Want to see your girlfriend again? 500K. 24 hours. I'll be in touch with details. My blood ran cold. This was my fault. I dragged Gabriella into this mess, and now she was paying the price. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find not just Armando, but Megan as well. What are you doing here? I demanded. Megan pushed past me into the house. Armando called me. He thought I might be able to help. I turned to Armando, who shrugged. She knows Wesley better than any of us. We need all the help we can get. I wanted to argue, but he was right. We needed every advantage we could get. Fine, I growled. But this doesn't change anything between us. Megan nodded, her face serious. I know. I'm just here to help Gabriella. We gathered around the kitchen table, Armando spreading out maps and documents. Okay, he said, all business. We need to think like Wesley. Where would he take her? Megan leaned forward, studying the map. He has a friend with a cabin near the state park. It's isolated, hard to find if you don't know where to look. I raised an eyebrow. And you know where to look? She met my gaze steadily. I do. I can take you there. Armando nodded. Good. But we can't just go charging in. We need a plan. As we strategized, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Wesley. Tick-tock, old man. Your girlfriend's getting impatient. Maybe I should keep her company? I slammed my fist on the table, making Megan jump. We need to move. Now. Armando put a hand on my shoulder. Easy, Stanley. We do this wrong, and Gabriella pays the price. We need to be smart about this. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. You're right. What's the play? We spent the next hour hashing out a plan. Megan would contact Wesley, pretending to want to reconcile. She'd arrange a meeting at the cabin, giving us our in. As Megan made the call, I listened with growing respect. She played her part perfectly, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she reeled Wesley in. Of course I still care about you, baby, she cooed. I was scared and confused before, but I see things clearly now. Can we meet? To talk things over? When she hung up, Megan's face was grim. He bought it. We're meeting at the cabin in 2 hours. I nodded, impressed despite myself. Good work. She gave me a small, sad smile. I've had practice lying to the men in my life. The drive to the cabin was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we neared our destination, Armando pulled over to go over the plan one last time. Megan, you go in first, he said. Keep Wesley talking. Get him away from Gabriella if you can. Stanley and I will come in through the back. Remember, our priority is getting Gabriella out safely. I checked my watch. It's time. Let's do this. As Megan's car pulled up to the cabin, Armando and I circled around to the back. Through a dirty window, I could see Wesley pacing, a gun in his hand. My heart clenched at the sight of Gabriella tied to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. We heard Megan's voice, sweet and cajoling, as she entered the cabin. Wesley? Baby, are you here? In here, Wesley called back, his voice tense. As Megan engaged Wesley in conversation, drawing him away from Gabriella, Armando and I made our move. We slipped in through the back door, silent as shadows. I locked eyes with Gabriella, putting a finger to my lips. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding. Just as we were about to make our move, Wesley's voice rang out. "Did you really think I'd fall for this, Megan? I know Stanley's here. Come on out, old man." The element of surprise lost. I stepped into view, hands raised. "Let her go, Wesley. This is between you and me." Wesley laughed, a manic edge to the sound. "Oh, it's between all of us now. One big, happy family, right?" As Wesley ranted, waving his gun wildly, I saw Gabriella working at her bonds. Megan inched closer to Wesley, her eyes never leaving the weapon. "You're right," Megan said softly. "We're all in this together. So let's talk about it. Put the gun down, and we can figure this out." For a moment, Wesley hesitated. Then his face hardened. "No, no more talking. It's time to end this." He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at my chest. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Megan lunge for the weapon, heard Armando shout a warning. And then, chaos erupted. The gunshot echoed through the cabin, deafeningly loud in the confined space. For a split second, I thought I'd been hit, but it was Wesley who staggered back, blood blooming on his shirt where Megan had redirected the gun. "You bitch," Wesley snarled, backhanding Megan with enough force to send her sprawling. I seized the moment, tackling Wesley to the ground. We grappled for control of the gun, rolling across the dirty floor. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Armando freeing Gabriella, ushering her towards the door. Wesley's fist connected with my jaw, stars exploding behind my eyes. But I held on, refusing to let go of the weapon. We were evenly matched, desperation lending us both strength. "Give it up, old man," Wesley growled. "You can't win." I laughed, tasting blood. "I already have. Look around, Wesley. It's over." He glanced up, seeing Gabriella safe and Megan blocking the exit. His moment of distraction was all I needed. I wrenched the gun from his grasp, scrambling away and training it on him. Wesley raised his hands, a sneer on his face. "What now, Stanley? You gonna shoot me? Prove you're a real man?" I kept the gun steady, my voice cold. "I'm not like you, Wesley. I don't need to prove anything." Just then, Gabriella's voice rang out. "Stanley, look out." I turned to see Wesley lunging at me, a hidden knife glinting in his hand. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw the blade arcing towards me, knew I couldn't dodge in time. And then, a blur of motion as Megan threw herself between us. The knife sank into Megan's shoulder. She cried out in pain, collapsing against me. In that moment of chaos, Gabriella acted. She grabbed a heavy vase from a nearby table and brought it down on Wesley's head with a sickening crack. Wesley crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The cabin fell silent, save for our heavy breathing and Megan's pained whimpers. "Megan," I said, lowering her gently to the ground. "Why? Why did you do that?" She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with pain but clear with purpose. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I needed to make amends." As Armando called for an ambulance and the police, I found myself holding Megan's hand, a complex swirl of emotions churning inside me. Gabriella knelt beside us, her face pale but determined. "Let me see that wound," she said to Megan. "I have some first aid training." As Gabriella tended to Megan, I stood up, my legs shaky. I looked down at Wesley's unconscious form, feeling not triumph, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "It's over," Armando said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You did it, Stanley." I shook my head. "We did it. All of us." The sound of sirens pierced the night air. As the cabin filled with police and paramedics, I gave my statement in a daze. Wesley was hauled away in handcuffs, still unconscious. Megan was loaded into an ambulance, Gabriella insisting on riding with her. As the chaos subsided, I found myself alone on the cabin's porch, staring out into the darkness. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollow and uncertain. Gabriella's voice startled me out of my reverie. "Hey," she said softly. You okay? I turned to her, drinking in the sight of her safe and whole. Shouldn't I be asking you that? She smiled, stepping closer. I'm tougher than I look. But you've been through a lot. I nodded, unable to find the words to express the tumult of emotions inside me. Gabriella seemed to understand. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. It's really over now, she said. What happens next is up to you. I looked at her, this strong, compassionate woman who had stood by me through all of this. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. What happens next, I said slowly, is that we build something new. Together. Gabriella's smile widened. She leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that felt like a promise, like a new beginning. As we drove back to the city, leaving the cabin and all it represented behind, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the journey. The hospital waiting room was a study in contrasts. Gabriella sat beside me, her hand warm in mine, while Armando paced restlessly nearby. And there, across the room, sat Sophie and Jake, my children, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Dad, Sophie said, approaching cautiously, what's going on? Why is Mom in surgery? I took a deep breath, gesturing for them to sit. It's a long story, kids, but the short version is, your mother saved my life tonight. Jake's eyes widened. Saved your life? From what? I exchanged a glance with Gabriella, who nodded encouragingly. From Wesley, I said. The man she was seeing. Sophie's face hardened. You mean the guy she cheated on you with? Why would she save you from him? Because people can change, Gabriella interjected gently. Your mother made some big mistakes, but when it mattered most, she did the right thing. The kids fell silent, processing this information. I watched their faces, seeing the conflict there. They had been through so much, caught in the middle of a war they never asked for. Listen, I said, leaning forward. I know these past few months have been hard on you, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that no matter what happens between your mother and me, we both love you very much. Jake nodded slowly. So, what happens now? Before I could answer, a doctor approached. Mr. Albert, your wife is out of surgery. She's going to be fine. A collective sigh of relief went through our group. As the doctor gave us details about Megan's condition, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Armando, a serious expression on his face. We need to talk, he said quietly. I excused myself and followed him to a quiet corner of the waiting room. What is it? I asked. Armando ran a hand through his hair. I've been in touch with the DA's office. They're building a case against Wesley, but they want to know if you're planning to press charges against Megan. I blinked, taken aback. Charges? For what? Financial fraud. For starters, Armando said. The money she took from your accounts, legally, that's a crime. I leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling very tired. What do you think I should do? Armando shook his head. That's not for me to say, Stanley. But I will say this. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. I nodded, mulling over his words. As I rejoined the group, I saw Megan being wheeled out of surgery, pale but awake. Our eyes met, and I saw a mixture of pain, regret, and hope in her gaze. The kids rushed to her side, their earlier anger forgotten in the face of their mother's injury. I hung back, unsure of my place in this tableau. Gabriella squeezed my hand. Go on, she whispered. You need to talk to her. I approached Megan's bedside, the kids stepping aside to let me through. Hey, I said softly. Megan attempted a smile, wincing at the effort. Hey yourself. Guess I finally did something right, huh? I shook my head. You saved my life, Megan. That's more than just something right. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that. I nodded, feeling the weight of our shared history. I know, and I appreciate what you did tonight. It doesn't erase the past, but it means something. Megan's eyes filled with tears. Where do we go from here, Stanley? I took a deep breath, aware of everyone watching us. Forward, I said firmly. We go forward. Separately, but maybe not as enemies anymore. She nodded, understanding. I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, as Megan recovered and Wesley awaited trial, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I threw myself into my new job, relishing the challenges and opportunities it presented. Gabriella and I grew closer, our shared ordeal strengthening our bond. She was a constant source of support and joy, helping me navigate the complexities of co-parenting with Megan and rebuilding my relationship with the kids. One sunny afternoon, I met Megan at a cafe to discuss the divorce proceedings. She looked better than she had in months, a newfound sense of purpose evident in her demeanor. I've been volunteering at a women's shelter, she told me, trying to give back, and I'm seeing a therapist, trying to figure out why I did what I did. I nodded, genuinely glad to hear it. That's good, Megan. I'm happy for you. She smiled sadly. I know it's too late for us, but I want you to know I'm working on myself, for me and for the kids. I appreciate that, I said. Speaking of which, I've decided not to press charges for the financial stuff. We'll settle it in the divorce, but I think we've all been through enough legal battles. Megan's eyes widened in surprise. Stanley, thank you. I don't deserve your kindness. I shrugged. Maybe not, but it's not about deserving. It's about moving forward. As we hammered out the details of our separation, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. The anger and bitterness that had driven me for so long were fading, replaced by a determination to build a better future. That evening, as Gabriella and I walked hand in hand through the park, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. Penny for your thoughts? She asked, nudging me gently. I smiled, pulling her close, just thinking about how much has changed. A few months ago, I thought my life was over. Now, she prompted, her eyes twinkling. Now I feel like it's just beginning, I finished, leaning in to kiss her. As we walked on, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would have its challenges, but I was ready to face them. With Gabriella by my side, my kids in my life, and even a tentative truce with Megan, I knew that the best was yet to come. The man who had started this journey seeking revenge was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Someone who understood that true strength lay not in holding grudges, but in the courage to forgive and move forward. As we reached the crest of a hill, I paused, taking in the view of the city spread out before us. I said to Gabriella, someone once told me that no matter how deep the betrayal, the strength to rise again is within us all. She smiled up at me. Sounds like a wise person. I nodded, squeezing her hand. They were right. The strength was always there. I just needed to find it. With that, we turned towards home, towards the future, leaving the shadows of the past behind us. The story of betrayal and revenge was over. A new chapter, full of hope and possibility, was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.